Okay, my name is Robert SanGeorge, as you can see on the slide. My day job is that I'm a career advisor primarily for graduate students in School of Public Affairs. I do a lot of other things, and this webinar is one of them, okay, for everybody, not just for School of Public Affairs students. We're going to talk about, as it says here, advanced strategies and tactics for job searching. This webinar is overwhelmingly designed for seniors and graduate students, okay? If you are younger than that, you know, happy to have you stay, but you may find some of this irrelevant to you, unless for some reason you've decided to look for a full-time job, you know, in your sophomore or junior year or something like that, which most people don't do. But anyway, let's get moving. So this is what we're going to cover. How to think strategically about job searching. What is the optimal time frame for searching for jobs? That's a little more complicated than you might think, but not super complicated. Where in the world do you want to be? What kind of job hunter are you? There's basically two kinds, and I'll talk about that. Well, actually, I can talk about it right now. You're someone who either casts a wide net because you don't have that specific an idea of where you're going career-wise, or you are highly focused in terms of the job hunting that you do. How to use search terms effectively, and using LinkedIn versus Indeed.com versus Twitter. I still call it Twitter because you say X and people most of the time have no idea what you're talking about, and I think it's a ridiculous name, so I continue to call it that. I don't care what the crazy guy who owns it says. And we'll talk a little bit about Handshake. We'll also talk a little bit about Glassdoor.com because it's gotten a lot better as a job search engine, and possibly I should have made some last-minute additions to it. But anyway, we will discuss that too. By the way, ask questions at any time. Your microphones are muted because otherwise we will listen to ambulances going by people's houses and dogs barking and stuff like that. And family members yelling at you, you know, did you throw out the garbage? You know, stuff like that. So in the chat, both the webinar chat and the Q&A chat are both open. Ask a question at any time. If you ask a question and I've gone on to another slide, too bad. No, not really. If I've gone on to another slide, I'm happy to go back and address, you know, whatever that is. So even if I've moved on and you still have a question, you know, happy to have you ask it. So first of all, you should be thinking strategically about your job search in terms of things like what is the optimal time. A lot of people, well, some people are surprised to know that if they're graduating in May, for example, they should really start searching fairly intensively and applying to a minimum of 3 jobs a week, really starting in January and definitely February. And by March, it should probably be a minimum of 5 jobs a week. And I'm talking about a minimum. It could be 10. It depends on how focused your search is and what you can find in that search. Are you looking only in the DC area, in the District, Maryland, Virginia, or are you looking in other cities, or are you looking in other countries, which presents a whole new set of problems unless you have a passport or citizenship and the right to work in another country? I spent a major part of my life abroad, and I can address a little bit of that if you have questions about it. How do you narrow your search parameters when you're searching? We'll be talking about that. By the way, I've been doing this kind of career advising for 15 years at AU. Started in 2008, and so I think I've got a lot of experience to rely upon for this kind of presentation. Are you already working in a job, either part-time or full-time? I'm not talking about an internship now, but a job. And how relevant is it to what you want to be doing? Is there a possibility of a promotion, or at least a possibility of building upon your experience to you know, vault yourself into a better job? And what are the best tools to use for your specific job search? Okay. If you are a May grad, you should be starting in January about it. And by the way, if you skip down to the 4th bullet point here, if you're looking for a job in a management consulting firm, you need to start earlier than that. Management consulting firms often are recruiting people in September and October of the year before for the following May. Okay, if you follow that. And oftentimes it's really important and advantageous to try to land an internship with a management consulting firm the summer before you graduate, or maybe 2 summers before, whatever. So that means being way ahead for that kind of management consulting. It's highly competitive. They're pretty hard-nosed about the way they recruit and evaluate people, much more so than a lot of other employers. And you got to think way ahead. Another, again, just to skip around these bullet points a little bit, if you are looking for a career in intelligence and national security or homeland security, you really should be thinking way ahead because of the issue of security clearances, okay? Aside from wanting to have a few internships that are relevant to a career in intelligence or national security, if you want to work for the CIA, for example, you want to get an application in about 18 months ahead of time, because it can actually take that long to get a security clearance if they decide they want to go forward with the security clearance. Just to digress for a moment, the way that national security and intel work that requires a security clearance works is that you go through a hiring process. I was going to say regular, but there's nothing regular about applying to an intel agency. It's much more tedious and involved and takes longer. But at a certain point, if they decide they want to hire you, they will say, we are making a contingent, that's the word, contingent offer. Contingent upon what? Upon you getting a security clearance. And that may have gone on, that whole process of getting to the contingent offer may have taken 6 months. And then you could be looking at least 6 and as much as an additional 12 months or 15 months to get a security clearance. It depends on a lot of things. Whether you've been to countries that the US is suspicious of, whether you have family members who are from a country that the US isn't exactly thrilled with, etc. Because then that broadens the investigation of you. And anyway, that's that. I don't want to dwell on that too much because I recognize that not all of you may be interested in that kind of a career. Going back up in the bullet points, if you're an August grad, you want to be starting to look for a job in March or April, okay? And same thing, you initially, you might be trying to apply to 3 jobs a week, and then after maybe a month, you're upping that pace to perhaps 5 a week. And these are pretty solid metrics that I've developed over the years in terms of trying to help people essentially put the math in their favor. If you do 3 months of intensive job searching, so let's call it 12 weeks, and you've applied to 5 jobs a week, well, that's 60 jobs, okay? And you might think to yourself, well, that's a lot of jobs. That's ridiculous. I don't want to apply to 60 jobs. Well, guess what? You should, unless you've got a very narrow job career focus, and maybe you've already got somebody who is highly likely to hire you with a specific employer. But if you're doing, a kind of mass job search that most people are, you want to be applying to a lot of jobs to put the power of all those numbers in your favor, because basically, how many interviews can you expect to get if you apply to 60 jobs that you are a reasonable fit for? Okay, I'm assuming that you're not applying for jobs that require way more experience or skills that you don't have, okay? But assuming you're applying to jobs for which you are a reasonable fit, and you apply to, say, 60 jobs, just to pick that number, if you got 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 interviews out of those 60, you'd be doing pretty well, actually. 6, not so great, but once you get up to 8 or 10 out of 60, you're not doing badly. And if you're getting interviews in 15 to 20% of the jobs you apply for, you're doing fairly well. Then the issue is being prepared for the interviews and doing well in the interviews. That's a whole different skill. What else do I want to say? Yeah, if you're a December grad, you want to be starting right after Labor Day, okay? And maybe even a little bit before, but certainly right after Labor Day. Early September, you want to be cranking out those applications, okay? And, to begin cranking out applications at the start, that kind of assumes that you've actually been quietly looking for a job and looking at, well, what's available in the job market? What do I see on LinkedIn.com jobs? What do I see on Glassdoor.com or Indeed.com or other places I might be looking? Specific job boards on employers' own websites of major employers, okay? I worked with someone this afternoon who is focused on management consulting firms. And I basically we went over about 10 different management consulting firms. And I said, look, what you're going to want to do is bookmark the jobs pages, not the home pages, but the job pages of those management consulting firms. And probably once a week, you want to run through each of them, maybe on a Saturday or Sunday. We were talking about companies which you may be familiar with or may not, like Deloitte, PwC and KPMG and Bain and Boston Consulting and McKinsey and places like that, as well as some others. So, as I say, right after Labor Day for December grads. Now that takes care of that first set of bullet points. Thinking way ahead, if this is possible for you, especially if you are a senior, or let's say you're going to be a senior, could you plan to get a lot more credits done by the first semester of your last year of your senior year, so that you might be able to take a lighter academic load in that semester, and then two things become possible. You can spend more time looking for jobs, number one. Also, it makes it maybe possible for you to either work full-time during your last semester, or at least devote more hours, so that if you were to get an offer in, say, February or March of a particular year and you were graduating in May, you might be able to negotiate, if you were only taking, say, 6 credit hours of undergraduate work, you might be able to negotiate and say, well, I can work full-time, or I can work 30 hours a week or something like that. And can we arrive at a solution that makes this a win-win for both of us? Doesn't happen that much. Generally speaking, employers only want to look at people who already have degrees, but it is possible, okay? In general, ignoring everything else I've just talked about, the best time for job searching is January through June, and September through Thanksgiving. Things kind of slow down after, starting with Thanksgiving, all the way through New Year's, but job postings don't stop by any means at that time. Thanksgiving weekend's not a good time to look, but once that weekend is over, there will be job postings all the way up to a couple of days before Christmas, and then it will really drop off significantly until after New Year's. You will probably even notice that for the week after New Year's, a lot of people remain on vacation, and there are fewer job postings at that time. So that's the time frame, all right, that you're working with. Time frames, I probably should say. Where do you want to be geographically? Only in the District of Maryland or Virginia, other cities. This is really a key. Wherever you are looking for a job, if at all possible, you want to use somebody's local address for that city. If you've already graduated, if you're a recent alumni, or if you're, let's say in May, you're going to immediately leave the DC area because you can't afford to live here, and you're moving back home, which I hear from a lot of seniors, you want to not have a Peoria, Illinois address on your resume when you're looking in DC. It's a killer not to have a DC address on your resume and your cover letter. DC area is what I mean, not necessarily District of Columbia. Within a 25, 30-mile radius of DC, of the center of DC. And if you don't have any family or friends in this area, then use AU's address, 4400 Massachusetts Avenue, Washington, DC. And by the way, if you're looking in the DC area and you don't want to put your private address on a resume to protect your privacy, that's perfectly understandable. Then use the 4400 Mass Ave address. No one is ever going to send you snail mail when you apply for a job. It's just not going to happen. They are going to phone you. They're going to text you. They're going to send you an email. Okay, probably emails, most likely, maybe a text, maybe phone you, maybe. If you are looking outside the USA, that's got its own kind of challenge that I'm not going to go into a huge amount of. I mean, I could do a whole webinar just on, the challenges of looking for a job outside the United States if you're a U.S. citizen, if you're only a U.S. citizen. I should have taken that line out about it's far more difficult during the pandemic. I guess I forgot about that. And you also want to research the differences in resumes. I spent upwards of half my adult life in Europe, and European resumes are different. They're more detailed. Most countries want you to have a thumbnail facial photograph up in the upper right or left-hand corner of the resume. They want to know how old you are. In the US, it is illegal for an employer to ask for a photo, and it's illegal for them to ask how old you are because of issues of potential age discrimination, racial, ethnic discrimination, gender discrimination to some degree, etc. The strategy now, of course, these days, doing a Zoom interview is probably 95% of the time. That's what you're going to do on the first interview and the second interview and maybe the third interview. If you're looking, if you've got not an offer, but a interest from an employer way outside of where you are located, wherever that is, you want to offer to do well, basically a Zoom call. Forget Skype is kind of from 10 years ago. You want to do a Zoom call or Microsoft Teams, okay? And that should not be a problem these days because all employers are mostly doing that for interviewing anyway. I do not see any questions, and feel free to ask. So I'm going to keep going. Now, let's talk about what kind of job hunter you are. Do you have a well-defined career focus? Okay, that if you don't, that makes you kind of a wide net casting job hunter. Okay, but what can you do if you're not that sure about what you want to do? You want to focus on a specific employment sector or specific employers. So, for example, if you think to yourself, well, I've had some students come to me and say, I want to work in the nonprofit sector. And then I say, well, what kind of organization? And they say, well, I'm not sure. And then I sort of try running them through it, human rights, civil rights, social justice, environment, transportation, reproductive health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Also, progressive nonprofits or conservative nonprofits or non-political nonprofits that work on issues that aren't that political. So those are things you want to think about if you are someone who does not have a significant career focus right now. And it's something you want to be thinking about before you talk to a career advisor, because then it will help move the conversation along in a way that is more value added for you. Also, do you want to work for the government on a federal or state or local level? We overwhelmingly think of federal government here, but I just read a story that kind of knocked me over yesterday. There are 5,000 job vacancies in Maryland state government, and they're having an unbelievably difficult time filling those vacancies. And the governor, Westmore, new governor, pretty popular guy, he said that he was going to have significantly filled a lot of those vacancies by his first year in office. And guess what? He's just about at his first year in office, and he's made almost no progress. And he's kind of, I'm a fan of the guy, but he's kind of making excuses as to why they haven't made much progress in filling 5,000 vacant jobs. Now, some of those jobs are probably things that people don't especially want to do, like prison guards, okay? But there might be some pretty interesting jobs there, and it might behoove you, if you're interested in working in state government in Maryland, to go to the Maryland State Job Board, and it's going to be broken down into sections, like the courts and prisons, and I want to get off that subject a little bit, and social services, and Maryland Department of the Environment, Maryland Department of Natural Resources, things like that, okay? The nonprofit community, it's a large sector. It varies tremendously in terms of compensation and basically it works this way. The larger the organization, generally the better they pay. The smaller the nonprofit, generally the worse they pay. And the biggest nonprofits, the American Red Cross, AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, which I think is the largest nonprofit in the United States, they pay quite well. Okay. Really small organizations, I don't want to point out any small names, don't pay that well. And not to make a comment that I don't want you to think this is an anti-religious comment, but faith-based organizations pay the worst because their feeling is you're doing it for a higher purpose. And they will pay generally anywhere from 10 to 20% less than the same job or equivalent job might pay outside the faith-based sector, okay? Understand if you're getting into faith-based work, that's fine. And by the way, a lot of hiring is done by faith-based organizations of people who are not of their faith. I was CEO of a refugee relief organization for a while, and the main refugee relief organizations in this country are faith-based, about 80% of them. And what I found, much to my surprise, because I am not a religious person, was that except for, well, one particular, well, I'll be candid about it, except for evangelicals, the other organizations do not try to shove religion down your throat. When you're working for the Catholics or the Episcopalians, there's a Jewish organization, Methodist, etc. You can work there, and because of all the fact that there's a lot of Middle Eastern refugees who are obviously mostly Muslim, they can't just hire Catholics or Methodists or whatever. It wouldn't make any sense. Anyway, that's a long way of saying that in the nonprofit community, it's a large sector, and the pay varies considerably. The corporate sector. Now, in the District, Maryland, and Virginia, the corporate sector often means consulting firms or federal contractors that are for-profit. There are federal contractors who are nonprofit, by the way, but it means usually means for-profit contracting. I'm going to get to talking about federal contractors in a little bit, and so I'm not going to go into huge detail on it right now. I still don't see any questions, so I'm going to keep going. Connecting with leads and jobs. Okay, networking receptions. This is something that we emphasize a lot at AU. We just did a networking reception. I think it was on criminal justice. I'm forgetting because they kind of all run together in my mind a little bit, and might have also included national security and intelligence. That was a co-hosted between the AU Career Center and the School of Public Affairs. Networking receptions are on campus, but there also are some that are off campus and aren't necessarily connected to AU, although we do tell you about them. Okay, and then there are job fairs, which have pretty much gone back to being in person after being mostly virtual for a couple of years due to the pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic. Then we have something that helps connect you with leads and jobs called Alumni Fire, and that's the address, okay, american.alumnifire.com. What is Alumni Fire? It's maintained by AU, by the AU Career Center. We encourage and recruit alumni to offer, to volunteer, to mentor and give advice to recent alumni and upcoming graduates, and also current students with regard to internships, to give them advice about internships and jobs, mainly jobs. And you can go into that database. The last time I looked, there were maybe 3,500, possibly up to 4,000 alumni who had volunteered to do this. And my phone is ringing, but don't worry about that. I don't know if you can hear it. So it's a really good resource. One thing I will tell you about working with that is that don't just look for alumni who have the same degree that you do, especially if you're a grad student and you're looking for someone with a master's degree in international economic relations or history or an MBA or a Master of Public Administration or a Master of Public Policy, because people get degrees and then sometimes they do other things. What you want to look for are sectors and employers, okay? Specific employers. If you're interested in working for Deloitte, see who has volunteered their time to help among alumni, to help AU students and recent grads with Deloitte, okay? Now, in most cases, in just about every case, the alumni have set limits on how much work they will do because, you know, they've got full-time jobs. So they might say, well, I'm willing to work with 3 students a month or 4 students a month. And then after a month, I stop working with those students unless it's absolutely necessary to continue. And then I'm opened up to work with 3 more or 5 more students. Okay, that's the way Alumni Fire works. It's a really good tool. It's free. All you got to do is go to that address, and I think they need your name and your email address or something like that. And that's it. And then you've got use of it. Okay. And it also is useful for looking for internships, for connecting up with alumni. Now, remember, these are not people who are hiring. If you're not connecting up with hiring managers, you're connecting up with people who are going to give you advice. All right. Then there's something called informational interviewing. It's useful. It can be time consuming. What is informational interviewing? That's where you get someone to agree to meet with you and provide you information about what that employer does, how you might best go about getting a job there, and also information about the sector, not just about their company or their organization, but also their competitors and what the trends are in their sector. Is it up? Is it down in terms of hiring? Or is it just steady? You know, what's the situation there? Never, ever, ever, ever try to turn an informational interview into a job interview, because people will get really ticked off. Every time I've heard of someone trying to do this, the inevitable result is that the person they were meeting with gets very annoyed and doesn't want to work with them anymore. So it's informational only. And by and large, the vast bulk of people you're meeting with are not in hiring positions. I mean, I was in hiring positions most of my career because I was a senior executive, but I was only in the position of hiring when there were vacancies. And that was what, maybe 10% of the time, something like that. And the rest of my staff, except for some middle managers I supervised, they didn't hire anybody. They might have been useful to get advice from, but they were not in hiring positions. So most people, you know, are not hiring managers. Use the contacts you already have, professors, fellow students who are already in the job market, perhaps people you knew who are 2 years older than you and graduated a couple of years earlier as undergrads, and now they're in the job market, and maybe you can use them. Family, friends, friends of your parents, friends of other relatives, friends of your long lost uncle, you know, whatever. Use whatever context you've got to get advice and potentially get connected up with jobs. And then, of course, we have job boards, right? Now, let's, first of all, before we get to job boards, kind of go through this inverted pyramid about how you focus your job search, which I have found in giving this presentation a number of times people really like. First of all, what do you want to be? All right, maybe you've already answered that question to yourself. And then where do you want to be? Maybe you've already answered that question too. Most of the people I meet with know where they want to be and what they want to be, sort of what they want to be. What kind of a job do I want? Do I want to be a manager? Do I want to be a policy analyst? Do I want to be an historian, a professor, a high school teacher, etc.? Okay. What is going to be the link between the degree I'm receiving, whether it's an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree, and the job or the career I want to pursue? A lot of people, undergrads, particularly those in humanities and social sciences, generally have a much looser connection between the degree, the bachelor's degree, and the career they want to focus on. Those who are in STEM fields, you know, chemistry, physics, biology, computer science, they tend to have a much clearer link between their bachelor's degree and where they're going. And if you're going to be a graduate student, or you are, first of all, you don't want to go into a graduate program unless you've got not necessarily a perfect idea, but a pretty clear idea of what the link is between the master's program you're going to enter and where you want to come out at the end in terms of where your career is going to be. I occasionally, not very often, fortunately, meet with people who've gone through 3 out of 4 semesters of a master's program, and then they say, well, I'm not really sure this is what I should have done. And that's a problem. Okay, that's a big problem. Now, what employment sector are you looking at? That's another way of starting to narrow this down in terms of the inverted pyramid. Do you want to work for a small employer or a large employer? Here's the difference. Generally, not just in the nonprofit sector, but in general, larger employers tend to pay better to some degree, even in the for-profit sector. With smaller employers, you often get to do a lot more earlier in your career and branch out. You're not restricted as much by a bureaucracy within the employer. On the other hand, you get a lot more support. You get a well-functioning human resources office and a well-functioning financial office in terms of making sure that your paycheck is correct and they're giving you the right kind of contribution to your 401k program and stuff like that. Smaller employers tend to be not as good as that at that kind of stuff. But again, you can get up to do a lot of other things. I ran a very small organization once, and I had a couple of recent AU grads working for me. One was from School of Public Affairs, the other was from SIS, and they got to do a tremendous number of things over a period of about almost 2 years I was there, because they were very capable and they gained a lot of varied experience that served them well as they proceeded onward and upward in their careers. And they're doing pretty well, by the way. So that's the kind of thing that can happen with smaller employers. But larger employers will pay better, and your job is quite clearly defined, and things will generally work the way they should with the employer. What are your salary expectations? How much money do you hope to be making? That's going to, for example, if you want to work in you're going to make more money in the private sector usually than in the government. The trade-off is in the government, you have a lot more job security. Okay. So there's always trade-offs. Okay. Then you may want, as we're working our way down this inverted pyramid, you want to identify specific employers. And by specific, I don't mean 2 or 3, I mean 10 or 20 or 30 that you want to start focusing on and finding relevant job postings from those employers. And then when you see postings that, and you want to have your search set up so that if at all possible, if you're, let's see, okay, we're in November. Let's say this is March, okay, and you're a May graduate. In whether you're getting a master's degree or a bachelor's degree, and it's March, and you're applying to 5 minimum jobs a week. When you want to have your search set up so that you are seeing relevant job postings within no more than 48 hours after the time they've been posted. Okay, that means using the mainstream job search engines really well. That means checking with employers' own job boards on their own websites. That means using auto searches in LinkedIn and Indeed, places like that. And then when you see something you want to apply for, you jump on it. And by that, I mean, if at all possible, drop everything. If that's not possible, you want to get that job application in the same day, even if it means staying up an hour and losing an hour's sleep. You want that application to be in the inbox of probably a human resources person the next day when they come in, potentially as early as 8 a.m. Okay, that's the way to be as competitive as possible. Preparing for interviews. Okay, just about any career advisor at AU can help you prepare for interviews, and by that I don't necessarily mean mock interviews, but just general interview preparation. So, for example, for the people I advise in the School of Public Affairs, I offer a session that takes about 45 minutes called Interview Prep, and I go through everything about interviews from A to Z. That doesn't require you to have an interview upcoming. Most career advisors will tell you that hypothetical mock interviews don't work because there's no job description in front of you, and it's hard to ask focused questions. The trick with regard to mock interviews, let's say an employer calls you and they want to, and today is what? It's Wednesday. Let's say they want you to do an interview by Friday. You want to immediately contact by email, probably is the best way, maybe by phone, whoever your main career advisor is, and try to get an appointment before that interview on Friday. That can be tough. I can tell you, if somebody had to do that for me, I would have nothing available tomorrow. I'm completely booked tomorrow. Maybe I could do one in the morning on Friday if you had an afternoon interview, or you could try to get the interview put off by a day so that you have time to prepare for it. And we could do a real mock interview. Okay. And the career advisor will need the resume that you sent so they know what the specific version of your resume was, the cover letter you sent the employer, and the job description that you responded to. That's what they need to do a proper mock interview. All right. Negotiations, by that I mean salary negotiations. So you've been offered the job. Excellent. Now there's the issue of salary negotiations, and there are ways to deal with that. And also, career advisors can offer you some help on that. There's no magic bullet, and if an employer is totally hard-nosed and says it's X number of dollars and that's all we can offer you, and I'm sorry, that's it, then it's take it or leave it. And some employers will play hardball that way. A lot of federal agencies do, quite frankly. And then you start the new job. And by the way, when you accept a position, you do so gratefully and you tell them how honored you are. You want to start off on the right foot in the job. Okay. So that's the inverted pyramid of focusing your job search. Now, a focused job hunter is somebody who is, and I'm not saying that you all have to be this way. Okay. But a focused job hunter is somebody who is clear about the job sectors, the employment sectors that they're targeting. They can, to some degree, focus on specific employers. They can, to a certain degree, look for specific contacts to make, okay? Informational interviewing can be important. If you're targeting the American Association of Retired Persons, which, by the way, is a gigantic organization, probably if you want an informational interview, your best bet is to go for human resources, because you could do an informational, interview with somebody in Sector 27 of AARP, and it might have nothing to do with where you're looking for a job at AARP because it's so big. And in the corporate sector, that issue is even more of a challenge. And now, internal referrals. This is a phrase that you want to pay attention to. This is mostly in the corporate sector as well as in the federal contracting sector. If at all possible, you want to get somebody who works for that employer that you want to work for to internally refer and recommend you to human resources, okay? Why? Because internal referrals are 1/3 more likely to be hired. This is nationwide. There's been research done on this. And employers find they're way more likely to be good and productive employees, and they're likely to stay with the employer longer. So employers know this, and major federal contractors all have, places like Booz Allen Hamilton, for example, massive federal contractor. They've got a section of their human resources office devoted to internal referrals. I don't know how many people it is. It might just be 2 or 3, it might even be one person, probably more than one. And they look closely at internal referrals, especially, let's say there's a job you want to apply for at Booz Allen. Okay. And somebody who works there. So you contact that person and get them to make you an internal referral. How do you do that? Basically, you apply for the job through them. And your cover letter says something like, "Dear so-and-so, thank you for encouraging me to apply for, job title X, vacancy at Booz Allen Hamilton. I would be honored to be considered for this position, And then you make a case for why you're a really good fit for the job, but not a long case. Cover letters should be maybe 5 paragraphs of about 7 lines each, roughly speaking. The longer the cover letter, the less likely it is to be read by an employer. Okay, there's an inverse relationship there. You've got to be concise. Do not put your resume on one side and a cover and a blank, sheet on the other, not sheet, but a blank document on the other side, and then start going through your resume and say, okay, I got to talk about this. Now I'm going to talk about this, and now this job and that job, and then the next thing you know, you've got a 2-page cover letter, and nobody's going to read it. Okay, so be concise in cover letters, which I define as about 5 paragraphs of 6-7 lines each, and no more than 1 page for a cover letter, and frankly, about 80% of a page at most, with regular standard margins and standard font, not squeezing it down, okay? But the internal referral, if you can pull it off, and not everybody can with every employer, but it's really, really important because it will increase your chances of, number 1, getting interviews, and number 2, getting hired, okay? If anybody has questions about internal referrals, just fire away. I'm moving on to alumni fire. I think I pretty much already explained it. How can you find alumni fire? You go to Handshake. And on the main Handshake page, There's left side navigation that has a whole bunch of things listed there. Click on resources. And then when you're in the resources page, in the middle of the page, there'll be a bunch of resources, and one of them will be Alumni Fire, and you click on that. And then this is the page that will appear. This is a screenshot. And then as it says in the lower right-hand corner, sign up with your own email or with via Facebook or via LinkedIn, whatever, okay? And in the case of, I assume the people listening to me now, you're going to sign up as a student, not as an alumni. Well, you might sign up as an alumni who's looking for a job, actually. I'm going to correct that if you are a recent alum. Using search terms effectively. Okay, there's really about 3 ways to do this. First of all, do you want to think about potential job titles? Things like research assistant or associate or program or project manager or policy analyst, or I'm not going to read every one of the things that's down there. Those are mostly, but not entirely, entry level. Manager positions are not entry level usually, in fact, almost ever. Or do you want, and there's a lot of other potential job titles, by the way. But do you want to look functionally? Meaning, I'm looking to become a lobbyist or a management consultant. I want to be in nonprofit management. I want to get into philanthropy, which is actually more of a subject area. But those are the functional kinds of things. And then what is the subject area? That's another really good way to look for jobs. And I'm talking about looking on particularly the big mainstream job search engines, right? Healthcare policy, children's rights. The stuff I've listed here are the kind of things that a lot of SPA grad students look for. You may be looking, you were not part of SPA, maybe be looking at a lot of other different things. And a lot of people at AU in different areas look for jobs with think tanks or policy institutes. Those are the 2 terms you would want to use. So subject areas, functional terms, or job titles. And you can use all 3. They're not exclusive. Okay, they're not mutually exclusive. Now, using the big job search engines, particularly LinkedIn versus Indeed, and as I mentioned at the outset of this, if some of you came in late, you wouldn't have heard me say this. I've changed my mind about Glassdoor. I didn't think it was as good as LinkedIn or Indeed in looking for jobs. I now think it is, as a result of having seen reformatting they've done. They've made it more user-friendly and more useful in general. So if you're going to use 3 major job search engines, it's LinkedIn.com jobs. Now remember, you probably think of LinkedIn as where you've got your profile and where people you know have their profiles. I'm talking about, you go to LinkedIn, you're logged in, and at the top of the page, there's an icon of a briefcase and jobs, and you click on that, right? And then you're into the job search engine of LinkedIn.com. In my opinion, it is the best of the 3 by a little bit, not hugely better, but I believe it is somewhat better. Indeed.com works almost exactly the same as LinkedIn, except you're not dealing with setting up a profile most of the time, although you could upload your resume into Indeed. The problem with uploading your resume into a place like Indeed.com is that, I will tell you now, because I've heard this again and again from students and alumni, you get a lot of offers to sell insurance door to door and stuff like that. I'm not kidding. I mean, that's really what happens. Okay, a lot of sales jobs. Perhaps you'd like to, sell timber or lumber at Home Depot or whatever. There's a shortage of people who are willing to do stuff like that, and it doesn't pay very well either. But anyway, particularly with regard to LinkedIn and Indeed, there's something you should know about how you search using them. I was just talking to someone a little while ago, and I said, well, how do you using LinkedIn? How do you use it? Do you find yourself having to tediously go through dozens and dozens of irrelevant job postings? And he says, yes. And I said, well, that's because you're not using the filters, right? And then he basically said, what are the filters? So here's what the filters are. You go to LinkedIn. Indeed works the same way. And you will see a search field. You type into the search field, research assistant, and then in the other search field, which is for the place, Washington, D.C. And you click on that, okay? Then the filters appear. It's totally counterintuitive. I don't know why Indeed and LinkedIn do it this way, but you don't see the filters until you start the search. So then you look at the filters that are going across the top, right under the search fields. The most important filter is called date posted. Why? Because if you don't use it, they will show you jobs that are as much as 6 months, postings that are as much as 6 months old. And you don't want to be, it's a waste of time. What you want to be doing is definitely not looking for anything that's more than a month old. And once you're into your real search, you're looking for things that are, you have options in date posted. It'll say anytime, don't do that. 1 month ago, 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, 3 days ago, 1 day, with the last 24 hours. So if you use, let's say, LinkedIn twice a week, maybe you only want to click on last 3 days. That will greatly reduce what you need to look at. But that's not the only filter. There will be another filter, usually called something like experience. You click on that, and then you get options. Entry level, intern, entry level, mid-level, senior executive, something like that. Most of you are going to be either entry level or the level above, which actually might be called associate. And if you've got a couple of years experience, 2 to 3 or 4 years experience, you might want to be looking in the associate category, not just in entry level. Okay. You can click on both, right? And that will start to drive the kinds of jobs you're seeing. And by the way, the logarithms are not perfect. The algorithms rather are not perfect. And you might say, I only want to see associate level jobs, but then you'll start seeing jobs that say senior vice president of this or that. In the auto searches that I have going that I use to feed into a Twitter account that I maintain for SBA students, I keep getting senior vice president of public affairs for the National Football League. Like, why am I getting this? I'm not asking for senior jobs, and let alone the NFL. Anyway, it's popping up for whatever reason. I don't know. And so we talked about experience. Then there's another filter called type, usually called type. That means, am I looking for an internship, a part-time job, a full-time job, or a contract job, which usually means limited term, like 6 months or a year. If you're looking for jobs, you're looking for a full-time job, okay? And so you click on that. Now, there is always a filter called remote. Generally speaking, I would not use it. I would just look at what else I get. Some of those jobs are going to be remote. Some are not going to be remote. Most of them, by the way, in the DC area at least, are going to be hybrid. It's typically 2 to 3 days a week in the office, usually 3 for most employers. There's a lot of federal agencies that are still letting people work fully remote. Congress is putting a lot of pressure on the White House and the agencies directly to not let that happen and to at least make people come in hybrid. So, and also the DC government is creating a lot of pressure because merchants, restaurants downtown and stuff are hurting for that reason. Although, if you look at it from my perspective, as someone who at times has commuted to downtown DC, I'd rather sit at home and not commute and deal with crowded metros and smelly people or crowded roads or whatever. Anyway, I probably wouldn't use the remote filter. I would use the date posted filter always, the type of job, entry level, associate level, whatever. And type of job is, that's what that is. That is full-time, part-time, or whatever. The type of job is typically what level, okay? Experience level, rather. I'm getting a little confused here. But you get the idea. So that's what you will find on all of those. Now, with regard to Twitter, it's not as effective as it used to be in terms of there are some employers that maintain Twitter accounts like the Human Resources account, and they actually post jobs. And you might want to follow a company in particular or a nonprofit organization whose HR people are tweeting jobs and internships, okay? Twitter is becoming less effective, in case you haven't noticed. And I'm not sure, I try not to deal with the rest of the crazy part of Twitter. I only deal with the account that I maintain, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But anyway, you want to be using search terms effectively, okay? And I've already gone through a lot of this. So in fact, this is just a repeat of what I mentioned previously. And that's that. And actually, that was, I went backwards in the slides. This is just a screenshot of Twitter's job board. Okay. I don't remember what kind of search I was looking for here, but there was a state government affairs job with TikTok. This was a long time ago, so don't go trying to apply for that job. This is like 2 years ago. I did this screenshot. What happens is on the left side, you have just a very short description. You click on something like state government TikTok, and then the longer description comes on the other side, and then you figure out how you're going to apply. Your options will be apply on a company website or apply via LinkedIn or Indeed via their system. Usually it's almost always one of the two of those. Okay, I still don't see questions, so I'm going to keep going. Your LinkedIn profile is important. Okay, the more experienced you become, and those of you who are current students and don't have a lot of real world job as opposed to internship experience, this is only something that's going to start happening in a few years. You're more likely to be found by an employer or a recruiter on LinkedIn than on any other platform. And I mean, I can tell you, I've got 2 adult children who are in their early 30s. They are in professions that are in high demand. I won't bore you with talking about them. And they get a lot of inquiries from recruiters via LinkedIn, and they've been getting them since they were 3 or 4 or 5 years past their master's degrees. Okay, and by the way, there's a place in LinkedIn, and I can't quite describe how you get to it, where you specify that you are either actively looking for a job, you would check a box, or you are not actively looking but open to inquiries. That's another thing, a different thing to check. And then the third one is don't bother me, and you obviously you don't want to check that. Probably for most of you, you're going to want to check actively looking. Okay, and your LinkedIn profile has got to be flawless with no typos. And if you've never had anyone else proofread it for you, ask a friend to do it and volunteer to read their profile. Okay, just to make sure that you're not putting forward something that's got mistakes in it. I've already actually talked about all of this. I just realized, yeah, there's really nothing else to say. I've already covered this. Oh yeah, the search radius on either LinkedIn, I think it's on LinkedIn, they ask you to identify a radius around the city you're looking, whatever city it is, in this case, DC. For DC, the radius I would choose is 25 miles. That's about the extent of the metro system. If you chose 50 miles, you'd be taking in Baltimore. And if you chose 100 miles, you'd be taking in Philadelphia. And any more than that, and you're taking in New York. I mean, this gets pretty big in terms of the number of things there. If you want to look for a job in New York and DC, do a completely separate search for New York. Okay, don't try to just expand the radius. That's an ineffective way to do that. All right. This is what this doesn't look like much. This is what a job board on LinkedIn looks like. Notice all the filters right under the searches. It says all or new. Just keep it on all. Don't deal with the remote filter, as I mentioned. You know, search within 25 miles. Where is date posted? I don't know why that is not there, but it should be. Anyway, salary, I would not try to guess the salary of a job. I would leave that filter alone. Job type, that's going to be, you know, entry level, associate level, whatever. Location, that's where you're going to specify. You're going to reconfirm what city you're looking in. Notice at the top I said public policy, Washington, D.C. At location, I respecified Washington, D.C. Oh, the company filter, both Indeed and LinkedIn have this. If you were to click on that, what you would find is names of individual employers. And if you clicked on it, what it would do is it would limit you to just that employer. So if you clicked on, I don't know, IBM, then you'd only get jobs from IBM. So I would leave that company filter all alone. And then experience level, that's obvious. It's you know, it's entry level, it's mid level, it's senior level, whatever. And you figure out what you're going to use for that. So that's and notice that it works the same way. You've got, although it's not obvious from here, You will click on something on the left side and a more detailed description will appear on the right side. Okay, let's keep going. This is a screenshot. This is a shameless self-promotion of, if you're not an SPA student, you might not know about this. I maintain a private Twitter account at AU_SPA careers. I tweet 100 internships on average and 300 jobs on average per month. They are all relevant to the School of Public Affairs, which means they are also relevant to people in other places, like the School of Communications, a lot of people in the College of Arts and Sciences, some people in School of International Service, some people in COGAT, Business School. If you are interested in getting access to this, what you do is you log into LinkedIn, you go to that address, it will say tweets are protected, click follow to request access. You click follow and it sends me a direct message over Twitter, which I am not going to see immediately, but I will see within a few hours. Assuming that your Twitter account, your Twitter handle resembles your name in some way, so that I can say, oh yeah, I can go to the registrar's database, which I have access to, and confirm you're a student or a recent alum, and then you get access. If I cannot confirm that, I will not give you access. So then you'd have to send me an email and say, hey, my Twitter account is some weird thing that I thought up 5 years ago, and here's and I'm asking for access, and I am an AU student, and here's my name. Okay, like there's somebody right now who asked for access a week ago, and her Twitter handle is, I assume it's a woman, her Twitter handle is ELLE. You know how many L's there are at AU? I actually did a search in the registrar's database. There's like 75 or something. So I don't know who it is, and I'm not going to let them in because I don't know if they're actually an AU student. A lot of GW and Georgetown students try to get me to let them in because they have no access to anything like this. And my attitude is you should have gone to AU, So if you're interested in that account, it's, as I say, it's private. And you'll get a lot of job leads on it. Depending on your career path, a lot of it, or at least some of it, may be relevant. And it's basically pre-filtered, okay? These are all the Twitter resources at AU. There's my account, which I've conveniently put in gold. There's SIS maintains one. The other accounts are open. They are not private accounts. There's an SOC one, a CIS one, COGAD, and the main AU Career Center maintains one, but it generally doesn't post jobs. They just post information about careers and stuff. And I don't know how much job posting the other schools do on their Twitter accounts. My impression is they do some, but nothing like 300 and 100 internships a month. So those are all available to you, okay? Twitter. There's a lot of ways you can go on feeds on Twitter that might give you heads up. Like for example, do you want, whoops, let me go back. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Do you want to look for a job in New York City? Well, hashtag NYC jobs or hashtag New Jersey jobs, all right, etc. So you see all the possibilities there. But one caveat, if you want to look for public health jobs on Twitter, should you be following hashtag all lowercase public health jobs or hashtag some uppercase public health jobs or San Francisco jobs all lowercase or SNF capitalized and J capitalized for San Francisco jobs? So there are, nuances here that you got to be aware of. If you are going to interact with employers on Twitter, let's say you're following the human resources account of a big company that posts jobs on Twitter, you want to, you're always interacting carefully and professionally. You're always upbeat and enthusiastic. And if you're going to ask questions, you want them to be thoughtful. Okay. And yeah, you might organize bookmarks on Twitter with some of, if I go back to the previous slide, with some of these sorts of things that you might want to be searching for and have it all bookmarked for yourself, that is. There's also Handshake, which just about all of you know about. Handshake, a lot of the internships on Handshake, as you know, probably the majority of them are unpaid. Employers can post directly on Handshake after we vet them to make sure they're really an employer. Now, we don't have to do that if you're a federal agency, but if they're an employer we haven't heard of, we make sure that they're not some scam. that's trying to get your personal information and then, you know, rob you of your money or whatever. And yeah, Handshake posts several thousand jobs and internships a year. It is kind of all over the place in terms of the kinds of jobs and also geographically where those jobs are, but it can be a resource for you, okay? There is something called AI interviewing that is being used now by a lot of private sector employers, and some federal employers, some federal agencies are starting to use this. It's a bit creepy, to be candid, but they're using it mainly for first round interviews. And what happens is you sit there in front of a webcam and you're looking at the webcam and it says click to start, and you start and it begins asking you questions. And then it will say click to start your answer. So you click and you start an answer. And then when you're done with the answer, you click stop. And if you've taken more time than the AI system wants you to take to answer a question, it'll cut you off in mid-sentence and give you another question. And it will evaluate. It doesn't tell the employer hire this person or don't hire. What it does is it gives a report. How often, how articulate is this person? Are they using filler words like like, really, things like that? Do you have facial expressions and facial tics? It will count them. Are you moving your eyes around a lot, which it will interpret as nervousness? It will evaluate what percentage of the time you're looking at the webcam as eye contact. It will evaluate your body posture. It will evaluate what percentage of the time you're smiling. And the employer gets an automated report, and they make the decision on, yeah, let's take this person into an in-person interview, probably on Zoom. And there are AI prep sessions available with something called Big Interview, which is available. You go to the resources page of Handshake and you'll see Big Interview, and you click on that, and it's a whole different system. And you can get a pretty good sense of what it is like to interview with an AI system. And you can specify the kind of questions you want to be asked. This is coming and is here, and it's just growing in use, by the way. So that's a scary thought. Idealist.org. If you're looking in the nonprofit sector, it's the best job board in the nation, and especially in DC for the nonprofit sector. It is small. It's not like 10,000 jobs on LinkedIn. And I mentioned Glassdoor before. Glassdoor in particular will give you really good information about larger employers, about the kinds of interview questions they ask and what their salary levels are. So it's also good for that, aside from just looking for jobs there. And that is it. I'm going to go back to this. So I'm done. Nothing else to say. Nobody asked any questions. Yeah, if you are an SPA senior or grad student, you can make an appointment with me. If you're not, you can't. You've got to go to your own career advisor, whether it's with a different school, or if you're an SPA, the undergraduate career advisor, Tammy Katzoff, my colleague. And so I'm going to end this here. We've been going about an hour, and say good luck and good night.